Thank you, Robert. I have some slides to present tonight, and I'd like to record this session so that we can share it with more of the public and get more input for this project. But I'm going to do the format for tonight's meeting. I know we have several Caltrans representatives here, and I'm very happy you're here. And I see Nafili Barrett as well. We're going to start off with giving a little background that some folks in our community and maybe some folks at Caltrans or even Nafili aren't familiar with. And then we'll get into a little bit of the new slides that Caltrans presented at the MCOG meeting last month. I did not know, we invited the Caltrans folks and Nafili to join us tonight. I wasn't sure they were going to be here. We didn't get a response on the invitation. So we went ahead and made a presentation. And then if there's anything they want to add after I speak, be happy to get that. Then we'll have public comment. I know we have at least one person in the audience who wanted to comment on this. And then we'll go to council discussion and see if there's any action we'll take tonight. So without further ado, I'd like to share a screen. Okay. And you should now be seeing my screen. Will all the streetscape update? Okay. So in January 2021, last year, a year ago this month, we had a town meeting and a Caltrans survey that found the town was very supportive of alternative 4A with parking on the east, pending an addition of a turn lane. That's what the interim would be set for. And there were some concerns in the town about, gee, does anybody really park uptown? Really, the parking is more downtown near the surf. In April of this year, Caltrans said, even though that we had strong support for this Caltrans provided idea, Caltrans suggested it was considering some ideas for a possible alternative 4C, including some truck and large vehicle parking at the community center, a southbound left turn lane at Ocean Avenue, interim parking at the Surf Market, which was something that the Surf Market and GMAC had repeatedly come back to. In May, immediately following that, at our next meeting, GMAC advised Caltrans regarding all three concepts. There was no actual alt C at that point. We recommended rejection of the truck parking at the community center on both safety and aesthetic grounds. And we recommended approval of the left turn lane and interim surf parking with several conditions, some very specific conditions. And it should be noted that GMAC has supported alternative 1, 2. We favored 2 over 1. We supported 4A and 4B. We supported 4A over 4B. And we also supported 4C with conditions. And we hope that input has been helpful to Caltrans. Tonight's update follows a presentation by Caltrans at MCOG last month, where they said there could be truck parking or landscaping at the community center. And I think the consensus at that meeting was leaning towards avoiding the truck parking. I think that Jeff Pimentel, the new project director there, said that we should just disregard the truck parking, that it would be landscaping. But there is a movement of a sidewalk there that we'll talk about in a minute. The interim parking would actually be in a 4th lane at Breakers Hotel. This is a 3-lane project through most of the town, but there would actually be a little space there for parking in front of the Breakers Hotel for 5 spaces. That space is currently paved, although probably not up to Caltrans standards. And as it gets a little involved with moving a curb in the future and that kind of thing. And then the idea was that after the interim passed, no specific interim was mentioned, but after it passed, it would later convert to either a bus stop or landscaping, and we can talk about that when we get into it. And they dropped the idea for a turn lane at Ocean Avenue because it was not within the scope of the present project, but it could be added later. In the Streetscape project, there's also a left turn lane on the north end of town that could be added later. GCAP committee, that's the Gualala Community Action Plan committee that oversees Streetscape, welcomes the council and community input on these ideas, and GCAP invited Caltrans to attend this meeting. Again, I'm very glad to see they're here. It seems like we've not had them with us for a long time. Project schedule that Caltrans proposed. I'll just point out a couple of things here. construction would begin in 2025, which is could be a little bit sooner or it could be a little bit later because of this big bold-faced disclaimer in the middle here, assuming a preferred alternative is supported by a majority of community members. I'm optimistic about this. I think we're very close to a final solution here that would fall in line with the town plan. And tonight's presentation will start with kind of a review of the requirements of the town plan to put that in perspective. I see Nafili has a question here. Nafili, I'd ask you to hold all the questions till the end, if that's okay. If it's not, give me a chat and I'll try to work that out. And this is also new. On December 7th, the Department of Transportation has a new director's policy on complete streets. And I won't go into quoting the whole 4-page statement, but the highlight is that all transportation products funded or overseen by Caltrans will provide comfortable, convenient, and connected complete street facilities for people walking, biking, and taking transit. And it goes on to talk about maintenance of those facilities. There's a possibility of an exemption, but it's kind of involved. So just to quickly go through some of the town plan requirements, I think some people are under the misconception that GMAC has a position on this. We really don't. We really follow the law, and this is the law. The Gualala Town Plan is the law under county ordinances and the local coastal plan. Changing it could take a decade or more based on the experience of other communities in Mendocino County, but further delay a much needed highway safety improvements. We follow this law in reviewing the Streetscape project, and it's been behind our support of the Caltrans Alternative so far. 6.1 notes that highway improvements shall be required to help make Highway 1 a scenic element of the townscape. So where possible, we always take that into consideration. 6.2 says a planted median shall be provided to help mark the southern entrance, which is the gateway to Mendocino County and the South Coast. And if we have a center turn lane, some of that could be low growth there if that's permitted by Caltrans. 6.3, parking areas shall be located outside the corridor preservation setback. We have a lot of parking. I'll show in a slide in a minute. And landscaping along Highway 1 and local roadways will provide an aesthetic complement to pedestrian walkways. So there has to be, and also partial screening of any off-street, off-highway parking areas and buildings. That has to be taken into consideration. Yeah, I got your note, Nafili, and we'll mention that when we get to that slide. 427, we could use cluster landscapes. This is recommended, and it would help maintain a more natural appearance in town. So some of the alternatives we looked at had landscaping, if you will, just 2 feet wide. As one resident said recently, you really can't do much with 2 feet. And it's nice to have clusters where you can plant a bunch of trees. And that ties into the question that Nafili was asking about the landscaping at the community center and the sidewalk. I'll get to that when we get to that slide. And item 430, the highway medians and embankments should be landscaped with ground level shrubs and herbaceous plants. Let's talk about flowers and foliage based on low maintenance and irrigation requirements, so they won't take up a lot of water. And we'll talk about maintenance. That's a whole separate discussion, whether community groups participate in the planting and maintenance of those, whether Caltrans under the new ruling will be able to participate, and the county as well. I know Nafili's been listening at that. Streetscape Requirements 6.4. This is a very confusing requirement. And I think there's been a lot of confusion over this in the discussions over the years. I've only been involved with this in 2 years, but long before I got here, people started talking about a minimum 80-foot right-of-way. We can't possibly do that through town because there's trees and there's gullies and there's buildings and stuff. We can't do 80 feet. And that's probably right. But I'm going to skip down to the bottom here. Exceptions to the strict application of these standards may be granted by the county with prior approval of the Caltrans district director, where existing development site topography or physical constraints mandate a greater or lesser right-of-way width. Now it follows from that if the width is available, you can't have an exception. If the width is not available, then you can make an exception. And they made exceptions exclusively on the landscaping. The landscaping is was to be 12 feet on each side. And 4A, for example, has 2 feet on each side. So if there were more width available, that was based on a 60-foot width, that extra width under this requirement really needs to go back to fulfilling these standards. This is alternative 4A and 4B. 4A has the parking on the east side of the street, 4B had it on the west side of the street, and that's only in the uptown area. This had very strong support in the Caltrans survey. A outweighed B, so most people preferred the east side rather than the west side. It was endorsed by the Gualala MAC in January, and was also supported by Save Gualala, a group that circulated a petition and now has over 1,600 signers on that. I mentioned parking earlier. Gualala is blessed with a long-term vision of its property owners to build a lot of parking off the highway. This was always done with an idea towards maintaining the scenic elements of the highway and to get people closer to stores. Let's face it, merchants like people parked in front of their shops, and people like to park in front of shops they want to visit. So it doesn't make sense to have a lot of parking on the highway. Now we're getting into one of the slides Caltrans presented last month, and this is the one Nephili was asking about. In this slide, there's a bike lane, and I think everybody on this call is familiar with the green strip in front of the community center. This would be where the farmers market meets, right around here. Sidewalk would actually pass through that, I think. And sidewalk was originally supposed to be along the road next to the bike lane. Nephili made a good point at the MCOG meeting that if they put it down there, it might actually require a little retaining wall to hold back this hill, because it's about a 4 to 5 foot rise off the highway. This was the area that you'll see was considered for large vehicle parking or potential future bus stop. And then it was also added or landscape area. And I would say at the MCOG meeting, there were maybe 3 or 4 directors who basically expressed concern about that based on what they were hearing from the community and what they saw on the slides. And there are 3 or 4 people from the public who also had the same feelings. I was one of those people. And the idea of moving the sidewalk, whether there's a planted area here or parking really, the idea was to move the sidewalk off the highway. That would avoid the need for the retaining wall, if any. And it would also bring people towards the farmer's market if it stays there. It's only been there for what, 2 years? I don't know if it'll stay there, it's kind of growing. So this was a pretty popular idea. I did express a concern that it might be difficult for some seniors to get up the grade. It's a pretty long grade. I have to admit that. And I think the majority of people at the meeting favored the idea of moving the sidewalk. There is another hesitation there that it kind of, when you have that area still available, it might expose it to future development. However, I think having that as a planted area there, if that width is available, would be fulfilling the town plan's request and would offset some of the impact of this very large parking area directly across the street. So this is a good place where I think cluster landscaping could go in, but we can talk about that more later. And Don Hess, I'll just point out that this purple area here is designated as potential future charging station. The next slide shows what they described at the meeting as parking for the surf market. This is interim parking. However, this is not the surf market. This is the hotel breakers. It's kind of a long way from the surf market. I'll get into that a little bit more. But I'd also like to point out the width here. 66 foot right of way here and 65 here. This is a pretty big stretch. So I'm not sure if that includes the sidewalk in front of the hotel itself, which has another 5 feet or so. So it's like 70 feet plus. I don't see any landscaping in here except for this patch over here. But this is an area where you'd be talking about wider width with no landscaping. And the purpose here is to use interim parking. It was expressed at the meeting that this could turn into either a bus stop or a planted area in the future. Once it's paved and curb, and this is something that I think Caltrans, when their turn, can fill me in on. Once you have the curb and all that, how likely is it that that could revert to a planted area, and would Caltrans do that? It was also not specified what the interim would be, or if the other requirements that the council put on interim recommended for parking down here would be observed, such as time limits and a fixed interim on how long this would last. I think we suggested a time limit of 45 minutes for parking there, kind of to help people think maybe it's not a good idea to park a used vehicle there, park overnight, or use it for employee parking. Now, this is an overhead shot. This is the surf market here. This is the area we're talking about where the parking would be. This curve, these nice hedge that's here now, a very mature hedge, would be removed, I believe. The sidewalk would come down along here and would bend in a little bit along there. And then you get about 5 spaces there on an interim basis. One of the questions about this, though, is that the surf center owners plan to redevelop this property, as we've talked about quite a bit. This carpet store had a demo permit. This video store had a demo permit. And frankly, if they took those out and paved it, their parking problems would be solved. And they plan to take those out. At least Mr. Bowers told us about his plans and shown us his plans to take those out along with these stores, reposition stores on the north end of the property, open up this view of the ocean, which would be terrific. And as part of that, they'd extend the surf market forward towards the street, eliminating this parking. The new entrance to the surf would be over here. So let's say all that happens, people walking out of the surf with a shopping cart would come out here, walk a couple of 100 feet up here to the sidewalk, push the cart down the sidewalk about 300 feet. And would they take the cart back? I don't know. You'd also have parking along the highway, which parallel parking is always a concern. Here's the diagram Mr. Bowers shared with us about his plans for that. And he is, to be fair, planning to update this. I know David Bowers in the audience tonight, and maybe when we get around to public comment, he can talk to us about where this is. But the entrance would be over here, I believe. An addition here, so folks come out here and go down here. So there is no landscaping in the Caltrans slot showing the fourth lane. Now I call it the fourth lane, but it's really the parking area in front of the breakers. But it does say with the future would be a bus stop or a planting strip. Obviously, we have a bus stop for our shuttle that comes through a couple of times a day over at the Sunstrom Mall. The Sunstrom Mall offers shelter. It offers indoor space. It offers stores, hot coffee, a restroom facility, and other things that would not be available here. So frankly, I think getting the bus off the highway to pause and wait and pick up passengers might be a better use. The school bus, I believe, also stops on the highway, which isn't ideal. And maybe we talk to the school district about that. The lower slides notes that it could become a planting strip or bus stop in the future. But I'm not sure it really makes sense to use that space at any time for parking, given its location. It's actually not what the council was talking about when it was talking about parking at the surf center, at the surf market. This is 4B, I believe, that shows the parking on the west side of the highway. And this doesn't change too much.
It shows the very small landscaping strip.
Yeah, it shows the 2-foot landscaping strip on either side, such as it is, and the approach to Ocean Drive. Keeps it fairly narrow here, which I think everybody appreciates, and offers crosswalks here and up to Cypress Village, but not so much to the restaurant across the street, which is currently closed. So for questions and comments, please notify Caltrans at Gualala Downtown at dot.ca.gov and the Streetscape Committee at gmac95445@gmail.com. That'll come to me. I'll share it with Robert as the other committee member, and we'll put those together and make sure we have keep abreast of what Caltrans is hearing from the community. We also have a YouTube channel where I plan to put this presentation. So that really ends my presentation. And now I'd like to turn it over to anybody from Caltrans and ask you to introduce yourselves. I see we have Elias, Frank Demling is here. Frank, we were told that you're retiring and you were out the door, quote unquote, on this project. And we also have Tariq Chechi here, who I haven't spoken to before, but we're glad to see you all. And Nephili Barrett is here from MCOG. Glad to have you here in Nephili. Frank, it's been a while. Thanks. Nice to see you back here.
Sure. Yes, wanted to first introduce Tariq Chechi as the new project manager for this project. Jeff Pimentel has a pretty heavy workload, and as does Tariq, but Tariq will be taking over the Gualala Downtown Streetscape project. Elias will remain as the design senior. I have retirement date set for June of 2022, and in the meantime, I'm just sticking around to help Tariq and others transition into their new role as PM on a variety of projects along the Mendocino coast. So for tonight, Elias will be able to answer questions regarding the design. Tariq is here just to observe. He's just getting up to speed. He's only been a week on this project, so Tariq's just now getting his feet wet. A couple points, Tom, that you made. You mentioned that it takes 10 years to change the local coastal plan. I don't agree with that. We had a meeting with Julia Krog and Bob Merrill at the Coastal Commission. Julia Krog, of course, chief planner there, the assistant chief planner at the Mendocino County. Their take on that was 2 years to get any kind of a town plan amendment. So I'm not sure what you're basing that on. You mentioned that that was based on what other communities experience, but in this instance, based on our discussions with Mendocino County and Coastal Commission, 2 years is what we would expect. Aside from that, we do feel that this project, because of Alternative 4C, you did mention that you felt that there was no need to pursue recirculation of the draft environmental document, and the decision on whether to, whether the CEQA document will be recirculated has not been made for a number of reasons. And the environmental team still needs to determine whether there are any new impacts to resources associated with the new build alternative or variations to the Alternative 4C. And also recirculation is being considered because the community as a whole has not yet had an opportunity to review and provide feedback on the new proposed alternative. And of course, the primary purposes of CEQA are to avoid, reduce, or prevent environmental damage, and also foster an informed and transparent public decision-making process by providing information to decision makers and the public concerning the environmental effects of projects either undertaken or approved by lead agencies such as Coastal Commission and Mendocino County. So recirculation of the document is tentatively scheduled, as you saw on the slide, for May of this year. And if the document is recirculated, should be noted that we would still be able to meet the project approval and the environmental document date of October. So the project schedule would not be further delayed due to recirculation. Now, we do feel it's important to get additional comments from the community when we recirculate, because as you know, this alternative has not really been seen by a whole lot of folks. And we want to be certain that we give everyone in the community an opportunity to provide input. Now, we go back to the October of 2019 meeting there at the Gualala Community Center, where we had broad support for the alternative at the time that kept parking on the highway for interim parking, that is. But of course, there were some discussions that this would require some short retaining walls, and we wanted to revisit that. But of course, once we put that word out, then that pretty much raised some concerns with a lot of community members that were opposed to keeping parking on the highway. So we want to be very careful that we take comments from all community members and try to balance the needs of all stakeholders. And that's what we're intent on doing. We, of course, are going to be relying on direction from MCOG and Nephili in particular. So we feel that we've got a good alternative that we want to put out to the community. So we will take questions on that now, and Elias is prepared to answer any design questions that you might have. Robert, you got a question?
Yeah, one of my biggest questions was why is there a shift of the interim parking from the surf market down to the hotel breakers? I was wondering about that.
I'll let Elias respond to that.
Okay.
So in front of the hotel there's 66 foot of right of way, and that's really the only spot that could accommodate the interim parking and the turn lane. And so if we shifted it more north, we would have an issue where it would eat into the turn lane that's north, and kind of reduce the interim parking spots down there and change the geometrics. So so to have that continuous stretch of the 5 parking in that widest right of way that we have in the project, that's the best spot to put it. And it's an interim condition. There was a question about the whether or not that could be landscaped. Once you build that sidewalk in the back there, that's never going to move. If you want to build landscaping in that 9 foot width there, it's very simple to build the curb out to where the bike lane is, where the shoulder is, and then landscape that middle part with minor construction. There'd be no lane configuration changes, and the sidewalk again would not move. The driveways would not be modified. So it's really a good spot to put those 5 spots. It is touching the corner of the parcel line of the surf market. It's not directly in front of it. But that a parking spot is 20 foot in length, and there's 5 spots there. That total length is 100 foot. You can see if you shifted that 100 foot over, it'd be directly in front. So the max you'd have to walk is maybe 40 foot from the door of the surf market to the first parking spot. So it's not that far. So
that would be in the current configuration of the market, but the market's not planning to stay that way. So you have to add another probably 150 feet.
Yeah, and as soon as the market changes and that's reconfigured, that could be removed, and the landscaping could be placed in, because those spots would no longer be needed, right?
It makes sense, Elias, in that it is a very unsafe area there in front of the surf to park, and moving the parking spaces a little south allows that center left turn lane that we so need right there in that part of town. It gives you more room. So I see that. Yeah. Okay.
I have a question. You know, we didn't really even notice that during the MCOG meeting, but it came up afterwards and we were looking at that. Having parallel parking on the highway tends to add to congestion, which is why the town planners long ago thought, let's do away with that. And part of the town plan requirements that I didn't read is talking about reducing congestion. I believe Caltrans even mentioned that during their presentation. So this is a way of hanging on to some congestion in downtown, and we'll have people pulling in and out. And it also, thinking back to 2019 when Frank was having community meetings, there was strong opposition from the hotel breakers to having parking out on the highway there. They're dependent on high curb interest. I tried to contact the owner of that hotel, and unfortunately he's out of town till the middle of the month. But I did have another resident say that they thought it was unfair to the hotel to shift that parking down there. And the town plan, as it is now, requires that if the width is available, to have landscaping there. The width should be used for landscaping first. There's no provision for interim parking at all in the town plan. If there is use of interim parking, it should be, I believe it should be a fixed interim. How long is the interim going to last? And not open-ended as to, well, let's see how long it takes the surf center to remodel this, because they've been working on that plan for 12 years and don't seem to be haven't moved forward on it, let's just put it that way. I'd like to see a time limit on that interim of 4 or 5 years. That's what the council has recommended previously, along with a time limit on the spaces so that people would not abuse the right of parking in those spaces, and a plan, make it part of the plan to turn that into a planted area at the end of that interim. Is that something that could be worked into this proposal?
Well, let me speak to that first, Elias. First off,
Sure, go ahead.
we do recognize that there will be quite a bit of community input, and that's why we are really looking at having another public meeting after we put the draft environmental document in circulation, if we do. And my guess is that we will. So depending on the types of comments that we get from community members, if the community is split on keeping the parking or not keeping the parking, then we'll have to go back to MCOG and get their input on where we go from there. As far as time limits on the parking, how are you going to enforce that? As far as how long that parking stays in place, we're not going to commit to that either. So I understand your concerns, Tom, but we have no way to enforce how long someone's going to stay parked at a location. We could certainly recommend putting in some signage, but obviously enforcement is not something that Caltrans is going to be looking to do. As far as how long that is in place, well, as far as I'm concerned, sooner John Bauer gets his properties in place, that may even become a non-issue. That may be solely landscaping because of how far out the construction is. So there's a lot of unknowns here, but we're not going to be putting in any kind of limit on parking aside from possibly installing some signage that actually prescribes a certain limit. But how are you going to enforce that as far as putting some time frame on how long that parking stays in? That's not something we're going to even entertain at this point. Elias, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I know if we can continue to look at this as we're not adding parking spaces, but we are continuing to propagate that there are people who park right there where those parking spaces are planning to be placed. And adjacent to that, we're adding in a turn lane, which allows a two-way left turn lane. In the current condition, there's no turn lane. And so the congestion issue is alleviated by putting in the turn lane, which allows people to move around someone that's trying to parallel park. But I think the rest of your comments is right. It's really up to, I don't exactly know, the police or some sort of traffic enforcement agency to handle that. And that's something that can be worked out after, after our project comes through between GMAC and the local enforcement authority that might be able to handle that. And I haven't heard from Nafili. I imagine she probably wanted to add a couple things to this as well, if that's okay.
Sure, Nafili, you want to go ahead?
Sure. I think that I want to say the Caltrans team, I think, has done a really good job of trying to incorporate things that they heard from the last round of public input. As you saw, it is very similar to what was presented previously. It sounds like there's a lot of support. People like the idea of realigning that sidewalk in front of the community center. And I agree with, everything that was said about, providing them sort of a nice entrance to the opportunity to provide the entrance to Gualala with that area. Even before that is done, just leaving it in its natural, kind of the natural state that it's in now, I think is, fitting with the kind of the community feel. So I think that's a really nice feature. As far as the on-street parking in front of the hotel, as you saw, we're working with, some existing constraints. There's not room in front of the surf market directly to do everything that's needed to be done there. Like Robert said, that turn lane is very important there. Going back many years, there was the idea of fitting the interim parking directly in front of the surf by having a discontinuous sidewalk. And, we've talked about that and how problematic that is, because that actually poses more of a safety concern for pedestrians, for people that might have mobility issues. It's just not a good idea. And it's harder to come back in and build something rather than when it's just interim parking, you're not coming to take something out and reconstruct something in order to eliminate that interim parking. So Regarding the length of parking, as Frank said, signage, the signage is certainly an option. I don't know enough about parking enforcement to say how that would work out. I assume because it's a state highway, it would be up to CHP to do parking enforcement, but it also might be worth considering. I know it's been suggested in the past that the Gualala community could consider some sort of a parking, like a downtown parking association to work on some of those things. And so that might be something to consider to work on those details. I don't know if a parking association would be able to enforce parking duration, but it certainly is something that the community may want to consider. And as far as the length of time that those interim spaces would be there, I think that, even though there's not going to be a built-in set end date to those, as soon as, if a GMAC says, all right, it's, that things are ready and GMAC can come put in a request to Caltrans, that's what would trigger that change. So I think that even without a set date, it's something that the community will ultimately have control over.
Well, let me
I'd
just
like to add a couple-
thank you.
I have a question.
Hang on, Robert, just a moment. I just, before we get too far, I want to thank Nephili for those thoughts and Elias and Frank.
Definitely.
As far as changing the town plan, Frank, I'll go back to that. 10 years has been what it took Mendocino, I know. I've been warned by the planning department that they're not really anxious to do a town plan amendment. I've been told that the average length of a town plan amendment would be at least 4 to 6 years, not 2. I don't think 2 would be a good estimate for this. I don't know. I haven't talked to Julia in quite a while about what the planning department feels about this. I don't know if they've seen this proposal or would be okay with these exceptions to the town plan. I do think taking this to the coastal commission at this point would be chancy. Interim parking is not part of the current local coastal plan. It's something that would trigger probably an amendment process. That amendment process, the scope of that could be spreading, which would not be a positive development. As far as the recirculation goes, the CEQA code allows for minor adjustments. This is a minor adjustment to the earlier plan. We haven't talked about the uptown parking yet, which is also interim parking and was added as a consolation when Caltrans said last year that they needed to put the 2-way left turn lane downtown because of the congestion. And so they took out the interim parking at the surf, which for the reasons Nephili noted would have been delayed the center lane. GMAC said, well, look, if you need to delay the center lane for interim parking, you can do that for a while. And as long as there's a fixed interim on this to kind of promote the idea that we get the redevelopment project as a surf center going along. And but that was rejected, and we came up with this idea for using extra space for parking. I don't think the Coastal Commission is going to go for that. I'm not sure this council would support that. I'm not sure the community would support that. I know that there are people in town who will push for another petition to stop that and that kind of thing. So, I'd rather avoid that kind of conflict again, Frank. We've both been through this a couple of times. And
those are all good reasons for, those are all good
20
reasons for recirculating and having another public meeting to make sure we get the input needed.
It's been 27 years, Frank, and these requirements have been supported by many town meetings. That one town meeting you cited was the exception, and that we took exception to that meeting. There's a clear track record here of what people want, a clear town plan that's been there pending for a long time. A lot of petition, 1,665 signatures on a petition saying 3 lanes, no parking, or only with interim parking at the surf. If we could accomplish the interim parking at the surf somehow, it should be a trade-off for the uptown parking, which really isn't needed. Nobody parks there anyway. And that would allow you to go ahead and put the two-way left turn lane in up there per town plan. So that's what I'm getting at. Robert had his hand up first. I'm going to go to him and then
Okay.
we'll go to Don.
We've been talking about the term interim for some time now, for many years. This goes way back to 2012. Interim constrained is what we called it at that time. Back in the days where Nafili's predecessor was still with us, Phil Dow, and we were working through this. We talked about interim constraints. So at that time, we must have had some idea already whether or not this would meet the approval of the Coastal Commission. I think interim, if we keep on calling it interim, whether it's the parking is in front of the surf or the hotel breakers, is kind of immaterial. But we'd like to know, will we face an obstacle by calling this interim when we go to the Coastal Commission? My other comments on the one drawing, on the one slide right in front of the Gualala Hotel, were that the historic parking spaces that were always in front of the hotel, the diagonal ones, they are not there anymore in this drawing, and that's fine. All Gualala Hotel owners, past and present, know that, or should know, that the Caltrans easement goes right to the existing curb of the sidewalk that's there right now, which leads me to the next question. It shows the property line on that one slide, the orange property line. East of that property line, the orange line, is the sidewalk in front of the Gualala Hotel. I think what's great about this Alt-C is it makes that sidewalk wider in front of the Gualala Hotel, it appears. It not only incorporates the existing sidewalk, but adds 5 more feet of sidewalk in our central, most historic, nicest part of town, in my opinion. It's like the north side of the Gualala Hotel. The sidewalk is rather broad there, a little bit wider. Yeah, thank you, Tom. So when I think about the historic parking places that are gone, they have in essence been moved over to the west side on an interim basis, those 5 spots, which also benefits the surf market, as Nafili was alluding to, or whoever, in their redevelopment process. It helps the Crust Pizzeria for the interim. And I was wondering if at some point then, when it's no longer interim, if that area could revert to a landscaping strip, or a combination of a landscaping strip and a wider sidewalk on that side, because it's so much the central part of town. And that's a question for Elias and Frank.
And I would add to that, we had a suggestion of splitting the landscaping between the two sides of the street.
Right.
But maybe 4 feet here and 4 feet here, since, you know, this is the most historic part of town. This is a hotel that's very concerned about curb appeal and has opposed parking here in the past.
Yeah. I hate to see that landscape.
This would be nothing. This would be nothing but 65 feet of nothing but concrete and pavement from curb to curb, and then you have the hotel sidewalk on top of that. So, in a town plan that requests that Caltrans build something that complements the natural surroundings, this would appear to be out of whack with that vision. Nafili has a question.
Oh, I just had a clarifying question for you, Tom. So I know that you've said a few times in the past that you didn't think that just allowing interim parking to remain in certain areas would require a town plan amendment, but it sounds like you've changed your mind.
No, you know, I think I'm trying to play nice on the interim facility, and I don't know what the coastal plan will say, or the coastal commission will say. But my feeling is that whatever plan we adopt has to show progress towards fulfilling the vision of the town plan. That's why a fixed interim is important. I think when you get to the coastal commission, they're going to say, well, how long is this interim? You know, this project at the surf that's been pending. Mr. Bauer said he started thinking about that in 2002 when the town plan was passed. His first plans for this were in 2008, 2009. When I showed, I think it's from 2009. And not much has happened since then. You know, and we're in 2021, not much has happened since then. There were demolition permits taken and they weren't used. So I'm worried about that aspect of it. I think if you're going to use the word interim, it's not too much to ask to put a fixed term on that interim. As far as the enforcement angle that Frank mentioned, well, you know, the good folks of Gualala are honest folks. If you tell them that, hey, we prefer you park off the highway, but if you need to park here, you can park here for 45 minutes. That will help dissuade people from parking used cars there that they want to sell. It'll help, like there's a wood selling truck, a wood vendor, who's had his truck parked in the Caltrans parking lot south of town for I don't know how long. People take opportunities like that and exploit them for commercial purposes or for personal reasons. It's not a good idea. If we want to encourage people to park off the highway, we should be encouraging them to do that. As far as enforcement goes, I'm sorry the sheriff had to leave. He was leaving losing his connection before. But you know, I know that parallel parking is not real popular with the law enforcement community on a highway because it's just raises the potential for an accident. As far as enforcing that, I suppose if there got to be a problem, we could call on them to ask them to write a few tickets. We wouldn't like to do that. And frankly, I think people would just respect the sign and say, oh, well, I guess, you know, they're kind of discouraging parking here, so let's go park off the highway. You know, we're not putting a parking meter here. So I think that would be a problem itself. And if this proposal goes forward, I'd at least like to see a definite plan by Caltrans to convert that to a planting strip, because having that much land. You know, another thing I noticed on this is the highway seems to jog out to the east to accommodate that parking, which doesn't seem like a great idea. And I wonder if Frank or Elias want to comment on that.
Can we go back to Don? Don wanted to chime in a little bit, and maybe we could go back to Frank and Elias after that to give some input on our questions. Tom.
Sure.
Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Robert. Yeah, I just have a quick question. I'd like some assurance from the Caltrans people, Frank and Elias, that any proposed interim parking would not interfere with the use and functionality of the proposed or planned for sidewalk and bicycle lane.
Elias?
Yeah, that's true. There would be no changes to the configuration of the bike lane or sidewalk in order to convert the parking to a landscape strip. So that's why, I mean, this design is the most sustainable design that requires the least reconstruction to convert to as close to the highway or to the Gualala town plan as possible. Is simply restriping of the north end of the town, and would be minor construction of the landscape strip area at this in front of the hotel breakers and near the surf market.
Okay, so basically, whether this area is interim parking or not, the bicycle lane and sidewalk will be fully functional.
Yes.
Right, and they will not move. That's the permanent location.
Okay, thank you.
So that helps me with my question, which was, can the sidewalk become a little wider in front of the hotel breakers when it reverts to possibly a portion of that 9-foot parking area there, interim parking area? Can it be partially landscaping and partially a wider sidewalk? The landscaping would help tie in with that little 2-foot strip at the south end of the hotel breakers entrance, and with that wider landscaping island there by the surf.
Yes, that's an option. You could do
Okay.
Instead of a 5-foot sidewalk, you could do a 7-foot sidewalk and 7-foot planting strip.
That's
a viable
included
option.
here. Okay. Thanks, Elias.
We have a few members of the public here too. I want to bring them into the conversation if we could. I'm seeing Dave Bauer, Bill Margette, Dave Shapak. I wonder if any of you have comments on this. And I'd be happy to reshare any of the slides you want to see.
I'm prepared to speak, but I don't want to jump the queue.
Dave Shapak,
How about,
did you say you wanted to speak? I couldn't understand that.
Yes, I can and would be happy to, but I don't want to jump the queue.
please go ahead, David. If you'd like to jump in, go ahead. You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks everybody for creating this opportunity for the community to weigh in. And I do appreciate the continuing work by the Caltrans team in partnership with Nefeli Barrett and her staff. You guys are doing a lot of work. You're doing it for Gualala, and I do appreciate the investment that you're making in all ways. I do want to, though, encourage you to take another look at the design. The director of Caltrans just recently reissued the Complete Streets Directive. I'm sure you were thinking about complete streets to some extent. However, the new policy or the latest release of the policy is quite specific and provides, I think, some very useful guidance in putting this particular project in the appropriate context. Starting from the south, I think the adjustment in the latest alternative of shifting the sidewalk to the east along the community center property makes a lot of sense and creates a great opportunity for placemaking landscaping in that zone between the travel way and the new location for a crosswalk. So kudos to you for putting it there and again, investing in this really important gateway for not just Gualala, but Mendocino County. Moving north, there's been a lot of discussion about what could happen in really the center, the cultural center of Gualala, which is bounded by the historic Gualala Hotel, Hotel Breakers, the surf market, the entrance into the Sunstrom Mall. This is really the center of town in combination just to the south of this particular sheet with the community center. This is where the community's heart beats, and placing this configuration of the highway in the center of that beating heart doesn't quite cut it. This is a missed opportunity to allocate highway right-of-way along the lines of the complete street guidance to create a place forever. The 5 interim parking spots is a distraction. I realize what you're trying to do in meeting a very broad range of needs, yet 5 parking spots here comes at the expense of really crucial placemaking right in the middle of town. This is a place where the sidewalks shouldn't be 5 feet, even 7 feet. They should be larger. They should be as large as we can possibly make them, as well as landscaping to complement those places where people will congregate as they relate to the market, the hotels, and the community center. Don't miss this opportunity. This is a big one. Once those interim parking spaces are on the ground, it's going to be very difficult to create space, create place at this location. Moving to the north, I want to encourage Caltrans to think again about the interim configuration, say in front of the hotel, surf motel in the north, and then heading north up to Center Street. This is a place where this configuration allocates a lot of width inexplicably to travel lanes instead of 11-foot width up to 13 feet, just to get parking where people really don't park much right now. That behavior is not likely to change. And what we lose here is a center turn lane and all of the safety, particularly for turning movements at Ocean Drive, all the safety that is conferred with that feature. This right-of-way could also provide a bit more landscaping opportunity, again, without having to increase width. Go down to 11 feet, travel lanes, reintroduce the continuous center turn lane, and provide some additional width to the landscaping strips. A 2-foot width is really going to be very difficult to maintain effectively. Try to get more green on the street. Again, this is an opportunity to build a place to make it work better for everybody, truly in compliance with not just the letter, but the spirit of the director's new complete streets policy. One last thing, and then I'll let go. The best location for a bus stop in this location really isn't the highway. Placing a bus stop at this busy center of town where there's a broad range of through and turning vehicle movements really encourages people to cut the street. Maybe they'll take the crosswalk, but maybe they won't. Continuing to have a bus stop at the Sunstrom Mall where people can congregate safely, comfortably, and have something to do in the adjacent commercial opportunities is really the safest and really most transit traveler friendly alternative. And so rather than toy with the notion of on-highway bus stops, either for adults or children, let that use go off the highway and just keep it where people will be the most safe and frankly where operations will be least complicated by those either the large transit vehicle movements or people getting themselves across the street and possibly in hazard's way. Thanks again for taking my comments. Again, compliments to you guys for all the effort, and I appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave. Dave Bauer, or do you have a comment? Dave, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
So particularly Dave, could you comment on the status of plans for the Surf Center?
I was gonna say this is the first I'm seeing of this new plan, so I haven't had a chance to go through it thoroughly. Other than that, yeah, you showing our parcel there with a 13 or whatever year old plan that has been kind of abandoned in its original form to redevelop the parcel in a new direction.
Well, is there a new plan, Dave?
We're still in initial development right now.
Okay. We spoke to your dad, John, recently. He said he needed to hire a new designer, but that was still the preferred alternative. That's why we use that slide. It's the only one we have right now. If you have something new, it'd be very helpful. But is the entrance to the store, where would that be? Would that be on the side, on the north side, or on the east side as it is now?
That is still kind of up in the air. We are going with new architects and a market designer, so we don't actually know yet.
Do you have any comment on the parking on the highway? This was originally conceived as something that the SURF worked out with MCOG in 2012, I believe, the interim constraint plan that Robert mentioned earlier. And the whole idea was to have parking by the surf market, and that's what GMAC has supported several times as well. And I think Save Gualala in their petition even supports parking in front of the surf market. This idea of moving it up here and on a wider stretch of highway, which the town plan says, if you have the width, needs to have a planting. That seems kind of problematic. Even having interim parking is probably going to be a bit of a debate with the planning commission. If we say, well, we don't know how long the interim is. We don't know how long it's going to take to redevelop this property. But if we say it's, 5 years, we could have parking there and then we put the center turn lane in. I think everybody could live with that as a compromise. Having it down here, you're going to have shopping carts down there. I can see it coming now. They're going to get into the road. There's going to be issues. So what are your thoughts about this whole issue?
Past experience has dictated that giving a time frame would be erroneous on my part, just because there are too many factors involved that are beyond our control. Steve will probably contend, but you'd have to again talk to Steve about it. All the parking that he can get is what he needs. It's one of those situations, the more the merrier. But again, you'd have to ask Steve on that, because it sounds like that's who's spearheaded it.
Yeah, I believe Steve did work out the interim constraint plan with MCOG back in 2012. And I don't know if your family was involved in that or not at all, but I had heard it was Steve that sat down with Phil Dow and worked that out.
I'm sure my father was involved in assisting with that, because obviously he has a vested interest, but not me personally, no.
The other thing I wanted to show on this slide is when we talk about the bus stop being here, The bus stop right now is right here, so it's still an easy walk to the highway. But there's parking for people who are taking the bus, who are dropping somebody off, or picking somebody up. The stores are right here. The bus stop is right here. The bus stops right there. It's nice and safe. It's convenient for everybody. We're used to it. So I just wanted to make that point about the bus stops. I know the state likes to have bus stops near highways. This isn't real near the highway, so that works.
Yeah, you're talking about the MTA bus stop, not about school bus stop, because the school bus stop stops on the highway.
Which is not good. Maybe we could talk to the school about using the MTA bus stop. Seems like it'd be more convenient for everybody as well.
It's
In terms of their direct path of travel, they're on the most convenient path. They do sweep up and around Mary Star already. So having them go into that tight turning thing with a long school bus isn't really practical. They got their stop signs and they stop traffic wherever they go. So they just stop Highway 1 and then let kids go and then move on.
Okay. Anything else you want to add at this point?
We are, continuing working towards our redevelopment. It's just, like I said, timelines are hard to predict.
Well, we'd like to hear from you anytime you have some news in that direction. It's been something that's been a stumbling block on this project many times. So any information would be very helpful. Is there anybody else who'd like to comment tonight? Bill Merget?
I have a comment.
Hang on, Melissa. Let's go to Bill Merget.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. This is Bill Merget. I've talked to you all several times before during the various years of town planning, and I'm with the Gualala Cypress Village Homeowners Association, and there's about 12 of us homeowners up there, and I've been there for 20 years, and I've been following and attending meetings regarding this entire process, during that period of time. I want to just comment that, and I'm going to mimic. I won't even say what Dave Shap had to say, because he was so eloquent in his appreciation for the efforts that everybody who's on this call here tonight, MCOG and GMAC and Caltrans, all of you have done exemplary work. I guess what I do want to express is some amount, and this is on behalf of all 12 members of our HOA, frustration that this process has taken so long, and it's been unfortunately so divisive for a period of time. Based upon a parking issue for a particular store. I was struck by a comment that Mr. Dimling made, that he said, we are looking forward to another community meeting. I don't know who the we is, because I don't know anybody who's looking forward to another community meeting. The general consensus I have from talking to people is that we're down to the 5-yard line here. We're close to completion, and that in order to firm things up, it would be great to be able to follow the town plan as it has been drafted, as the GMAC has proposed it, and of which the HOA is very supportive of. I think we could get over these small hurdles, and I'm concerned that there are these quote unquote new impacts that could delay us for years, which is really rather frustrating. So I'm hoping that there be consensus among the entities involved in the decision-making, that we come together here and not allow some minor differences to impede what has been a Herculean effort on behalf of many. Bottom line, I'd like there to be a bit of a sense of urgency to this program now. And I'll leave by saying that our HOA unanimously has been very supportive of GMAC and its efforts on behalf of the ambiance and safety of our community, as outlined in the town plan and as proposed continually by their efforts in this streetscape planning. So I'll close with that and just say, let's get to the finish line, guys.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, William.
Yeah, I think that's a really good comment. Thank you, Bill, for mentioning that. And I just want to show one more screen here. This is today's Independent Coast Observer, actually tomorrow's. And the lead of Brian's article here is, in April, the ICO printed an article claiming the Caltrans Gualala Downtown Enhancement Project was officially out of local hands That was a bit of an exaggeration. While no more local action is to be taken, the familiar topic can't seem to stay away for too long. It has popped up again as an update on GMAC's agenda, update concerns and alternative Caltrans introduced last April called Alt-C, et cetera, et cetera. The most common comment I hear is, why won't they build this thing? It's been 27 years. We have safety issues on the highway. It's taken too long. And I'll let other members of the council affirm that, but people don't want more public hearings on this. They've had many, many years of public hearings on this. People want to see some action on this. We keep coming back to a similar proposal. 1, 2, 4A, 4B, 4C, they're all similar. And then if we just gone ahead with 2 in 2019, I think we'd be closer to having this project finished and a safer highway for everybody. One that completely agreed with the town plan. And now we're looking for more and more exceptions to the town plan. I can't, in good conscience, support those without a clear path to completing the town plan. So I'll just share with that. Melissa, Melissa had a comment here.
Yeah, Melissa, I'd like to hear from Kevin, and then maybe some more people.
And Elias has his hand up as well.
Okay, let's listen to Melissa, and then we'll go to Elias, and then maybe back to Kevin on our council, and maybe some more audience members. Go ahead, Melissa.
My comment.
Go ahead.
Okay, my comment had to do with someone speaking about getting a bus in the MTA place. And I don't, the bookmobile, the library bookmobile goes up into that parking lot every other week. And it is so much bigger than a school bus or the MTA bus. And I agree with the last person who spoke, and I've said it more than once. Just build the damn road and stop jacking about it. We give you something, and you give us something, and we say, oh, this works, and then 3 months later, you punt this other one back with some other stuff that isn't on the town plan. I don't understand. Who's up there saying, oh, we need to do this? No, we don't. I don't know who you're listening to. You're not listening to us.
Yeah, the reason the ICO thought this was done last April is because the whole town thought it was done. We had this Caltrans proposal. It was supported by the town. It was supported by the Save Gualala group. It was supported by everybody. And the next thing we heard was Caltrans has another proposal they're starting to work on, and that took another year. So there's a lot of impatience here.
That's my question. Why do they have to come up with another plan when there was a plan they had in their hands? They approved, we approved. Why did you change it? That's my question.
Okay, let's listen to Elias on that question, Melissa.
It's very fun to be put on the spot for this, but we received lots of comments through, and they were very split on whether, there should or shouldn't be parking still. And a lot of it was surrounding that specific area, which is why this minor refinement to the alternative was considered. There's also other public comments that we considered, like the Ocean Drive and maintaining existing large vehicle parking at the south end, and which wasn't feasible, and so isn't included in the project. But as far as the timeline goes, the timeline is completely dependent upon when we are able to get funding. And there was a comment about complete streets and making sure we've included the complete streets directive in our project. The complete streets directive is not new to us. It's been around, and we have been trying to get the funding for this project through the active transportation program. And on that, we have a presentation, or we're going to meet with the CTC that rejected our last proposal in February, and do a project walkthrough and talk about the outreach that the community has given and how engaged they are and how much they want this project, so that we can secure the funding and get this built. As far as the timeline, is still not going to change. That funding is not available till 2025. But if we can secure it now and get it locked in for this project, and if we as a community can rally behind this alternative, we have an opportunity to say, look, we want this. Our community agrees. It requires, it's acceptable within our guidelines, and it meets the needs of the community. This is what we want built. So I guess I just ask that we support this alternative, and it allows us to have more influence and support from the CTC that allocates the funding that will make this successful. And maybe I didn't say that quite correctly, but maybe Nafili and Frank can add to what I said if I missed anything.
Please do.
I
Thank
think
you. Go ahead, Nafili.
I was just going to say, I think Elias did a very good job of explaining it. And although I understand that it's hard for the community to, look at the idea of another round of public input, there are guidelines that Caltrans has to follow as the lead agency under CEQA. And unfortunately, if those specialists, those environmental specialists at Caltrans say this environmental document has to be recirculated, it is a requirement that additional public input be allowed. There's just no getting around that. Whether the community wants that or not, it's just not something that can be avoided if it's necessary to recirculate the environmental document. So I do understand that is potentially frustrating. It doesn't necessarily add to the time, like Elias said, it doesn't add to the time when construction is going to happen, because that's already several years in the future. So we have a good chunk of time before we get to that point of construction to go through all those necessary steps. I think that where we are now is really good. I think people like the concepts in this latest proposal. Like we said, it is very, very similar to what the community saw. So when you say in April you thought you were done, this hasn't changed much since then. Biggest change is really that realignment of the sidewalk, which I think is a positive change to the project. I think people really like that change. So I think that this is something that the community should be able to get behind. And when you put something out for circulation, it's likely that you will get some negative feedback no matter what, but hopefully it is enough positive feedback that we can just continue moving forward. That's, I think, what everybody wants.
Elias or Frank, was it?
Frank, do you have any input?
Nothing more to add. I think Elias explained it very well, and Nafili filled in the gaps there, so nothing more to add.
Mary Mobert has her hand up.
As a member of the public and as someone who goes downtown and shops, it is exceedingly difficult to pull out of a parking space onto the street or onto the highway where there is parking. Where there is on-highway parking, you can't see a car coming from the direction where you are sitting. So if there's parking on the west, you're trying to pull out from the west, you have to pull almost halfway out into the lane in order to see that there's a car about to crash into your front end. Please take the parking off the highway. We have lots of parking other places. We don't need it on the highway. Plant it with low shrubs so that you can really see, because it really is dangerous. It really is. And right now there is a crosswalk where parking is allowed. And I have seen pedestrians who were almost mowed down by someone trying to turn into a lane to go somewhere. And it's just dangerous. Take it off. And no large truck parking in front of the Gualala Community Center. That would be even worse.
Yep.
Even worse. That was one of the worst high days I've ever seen. But that just blocks a driver's view of pedestrians, dogs, other cars, bicycles. It's hazardous. And I just hope that you understand. It just needs to be taken off.
Mary, thank you for that. And may I ask one other question? Given your years of experience in our community, the sidewalk by the community center, do you think seniors in our community would be okay with the sidewalk going up that slope instead of staying flat along the highway?
I don't know what that slope is. So as a senior, I've never walked that. I have visited the farmers market. It's been there for 15 years on and off, and has really been an asset to the community. Having a sidewalk there would be great. Anywhere where there's a sidewalk and landscaping and maybe a bench or two that's donated by someone in the public, from the public, would be great. I've lived here since 1976, and I have seen this city town grow phenomenally. And the street has widened and widened and widened to the point where now it's going to be 66 feet wide and right at the sidewalk of the Gualala Hotel. Many times it's gotten worse because of the parking on the street, and many times it's gotten better because of new paving, lack of potholes. Turn lane would be great all the way down the middle, so that people who are sitting there waiting for 5 and 6 and 7 cars to go by will not be holding up the traffic behind them while they're trying to turn. A turn lane would be great to be able to go into Surf Market or into the Mail or into Sunstrom's Mall or wherever, the gas station. So a turn lane down the middle of it from Ocean clear on down would be great if it could happen. And I like the bike trails. Bicycles have no place to go, and it's dangerous for someone who's a cyclist. It really is. Pedestrians have no sidewalks now at all, and it would be great to get people out of their car and walking. And I don't walk as much as I ought to, but I can't downtown because of a lot of no sidewalks and because of the way I'm just built right now with hip replacements and so on.
You're doing fine, Mary. And thank you for all those comments. I think, you've probably been here.
I apologize for taking too long.
You've been here since, you've been here since 77, and this project actually began in 75. They started thinking about the need for this. So you've had input all those years into this. I see Elias has his hand up.
Let's listen.
It used to be 55 all the way down that street, and now, thank goodness, it's 25.
Yeah, Robert.
Mary, thank you very much for your public comments, Mary. Tom, I wanted to see if maybe Kevin Evans wanted to lend some of his input.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's go to Elias first. He's had his hand up for a while.
Okay, and then
Kevin Evans, and then maybe we can wrap it up.
I'm sorry. So just real quick, if the sidewalk flares away from the road towards the community center, it will be built to full ADA standard. I know it might be complex to do that. It will be built to full ADA standard. So there shouldn't be any issues with wheelchairs or any people using that. So I just want to clarify that, and so I hope that helps alleviate some of the concerns.
Thanks, Elias. I appreciate that. And I had assumed that was true anyway, but it's a pretty gradual slope. It goes up to about 4 feet, and you're talking about probably 150 feet rise. So there is one thing I wanted to clarify about the negative declaration process. Yes, I understand the requirements of CEQA. And CEQA's section 15073.5 parts 3 and 4 clearly state that if there are minor adjustments in a project that does not need to be recirculated, these are minor adjustments we're talking about here. That's a clear explanation. 15073.5C parts 3 and 4. We've brought this up several times now. Yeah. And I don't think anybody in town would blink if you made these minor adjustments, whether with our endorsement or without it, frankly, and avoided recirculation. I don't think we're going to take action on this tonight. It sounds like we have a little time to deal with this, and we'll review this more and look for more comments from our community as well. And then there's one more, Kevin, let's go to you and see if you have anything to add on this.
Thank you. I appreciate the Caltrans presentation. This is my first pass at this, so I appreciate you taking the time, especially for me, because I'm a newcomer to this. A few observations that I have. One, I agree with the 4C that we need to put in a sidewalk and definitely not have vehicle parking there, because that is the gateway to Gualala. And the first thing we don't want to give to people visiting our community is that it's a place for mobile motorhomes or big trucks to be parking there, because that's not the picture we want to portray to people coming to our town. The other thing is with large vehicles there, and this is kind of beating a dead horse, we do have the farmers market. We do have our nonprofit groups that advertise their events in that area. Any large vehicles will really block the opportunity for people to see what's going on in Gualala, especially the farmers market or the community center activities. So I love the idea of the sidewalk. One option I would offer to that is I'm also not into a lot of landscaping, because that is a lot of water and a lot of maintenance. And I offered to Caltrans, and maybe working with the community, is maybe we should look at putting pieces of public art and have kind of an art walk. As people walk, drive in, they'll see the art, and also people will walk through there and see some of the artwork from our local artists. We have some great people that do rock work, and I think that might be a nice attraction and a nice entryway to Gualala. But agree. The one question I have for the Caltrans view: when's the last time we did a traffic survey? And what are the latest numbers? Because both the Sea Ranch and Gualala, the housing market is just going through the roof. We're getting a lot of, rather than rentals and vacation rentals, we're getting a lot of full-time people moving into the area, which is impacting our roads. And as Mary mentioned, you can sit at a driveway and wait 6, 7, 10 cars trying to get out. The other problem is if you're parallel parking and you're backing in, you're holding up traffic. And there's a lot of traffic and a lot of pedestrians that are walking and using our walkways. We need to provide a safer environment for them, for our bicyclists, and whatever we can do. I think we need a current traffic study to find out what the impact is and how we can address it. But I appreciate everything that you guys have put forward and your input, and thank you to share my thoughts.
Thank you, Kevin. Frank, I think you had a traffic survey last year, didn't you?
That's correct, but we can get some numbers back, traffic ops, and provide that to GMAC for distribution.
Kevin makes a good point. Things have changed since last year, but I don't know if it would be a noticeable difference in the data.
What else didn't we cover? One thing that struck me was the wonderful at the north end at Ocean Drive, when the sidewalk, what do they call those, aprons, in that one drawing and that one slide you had, Tom. If that could not be incorporated at the south end up the community center, those two bulb outs or apron type features at the north and south end of the community center. Is that a possibility, Elias and Frank?
Elias had to leave us to put his kids to bed. Good reason. I would too. Here's what he's talking about.
Yeah, those two features. The gray area, Tom.
Yeah, these are the handicap accessible crosswalk ramps.
If we all seem to like the sidewalk being pushed further on the east end of at the community center on the east side there. Can those features like you're showing here be incorporated down at the community center?
Let me see if I can get to that slide. Down here. I think there would be, wouldn't there, Frank?
Oh, yeah, that's, I
Okay.
don't think that would be any issue at all.
Okay.
I'll make a note and I'll discuss that with Elias.
And on that slide, can we once and for all remove the large vehicle parking verbiage?
Yes.
Okay.
And on this slide, let me just point out that this is a very busy driveway coming out of the View Restaurant, the Hotel Breakers. This is one of the few parking lots in town that is often near capacity. And there would be a lot of people, especially people from out of the area, coming out and turning onto the freeway right here. So if there ends up being some interim parking here, I would certainly want to see a red curb well back there to facilitate sight lines.
Right. What traffic safety recommends is a minimum of 20 feet from any entrance to any driveway, parking area, etc. So any
It'll be
parking
one
would
of
be
these
set-
5 spaces.
Well, depending on where that driveway entrance ends, there would be a minimum of 20 feet that would be needed. So I will discuss that with Elias. He did mention to me that he did include that as part of his design was 20 feet from the entrance, but I'll confirm that.
Yeah, I think we mentioned this at MCOG, and I think he said that it could be looked at. Frank, while you're here, I know this isn't your project, but I love our local makers or artists who make handcrafted items, but they have completely taken over this parking lot on weekends. It creates huge congestion problems, and people park along the highway to use them. All the spaces in here are taken up by the vendors. And people park on the highway to go see the vendors. There's a lot of congestion and confusion going on down here. It's something that I think Caltrans really needs to take a look at. And if it's not your project, I understand that, and maybe you could pass that along to somebody. And then the other thing is, I've said it before, I'll say it again, some red curbs along here. You hear people complain about this all the time, coming out here and pacing. I have slides if you want to see them of how difficult it is to pull out onto the highway. But really, some red curbs here would really enhance safety right now, and we don't have to wait for a streetscape project to do that.
Right. Yeah, we can definitely look at that. We talked to traffic safety about that. They did tell us that they would support delineating those areas 20 feet from any entrance to any drives for traffic safety purposes.
Thank you. I'd really appreciate any news on that you could share with us. We really appreciate it. We've been asking for years about that.
Okay.
I think we're pretty much done, Robert. What do you think?
Okay.
Oh, Julie Bauer is here and has her hand raised.
One more question I
Welcome.
had about the big bold blue line in front of the breakers, hotel breakers. Does that refer to what, Frank?
Bring the drawing up so I can see it, please.
Yeah, I will. Just a moment. See if I can find this in front of the breakers.
No, actually, I just want to clarify that although I'm not managing any projects, I'm really the in-house consultant to the other project managers at this point on all projects.
Okay, great. Thanks. But you are leaving, though. I'm sorry to hear that, Frank. We've
Well,
liked
I'm
working with
leaving
you.
in June of 2022 is when I'm retiring, but I'll be back in August of 2022 as a retired annuitant working part-time, just providing in-house consulting.
Double dipping is a wonderful thing. I'm
big-
kidding.
I want to know what the big bold blue line is referring to.
A typical section.
Okay, that's all.
Okay. And Julie Bauer is with us and has her hand raised. Let's please ask her to comment, and you'll need to unmute yourself, I think, Julie.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I had another meeting at the same time for Little League. So I did see at the beginning, one of the slides mentioned that whatever iteration, whatever plan is selected will be based on whichever has the most community support or something like that. I don't remember what the exact language was. It was in bold. I'm curious how Caltrans goes about determining which plan has the most community support. Is it at a community meeting? We don't have a voting a district with voters to vote on this, given this type of project? Is it based on comments that are received directly to Caltrans that the rest of us don't see until later? How does that work?
Yeah, and let me just amplify that. The actual phrasing is assuming a preferred alternative is supported by a majority of community members. A majority of community members supported a preferred alternative a couple of times now, and it hasn't happened. So maybe you can answer that, Frank.
Well, we will take into consideration all those comments that come from the community, but ultimately we'll be taking that to MCOG and working with Neely Barrett and also talking with the county and coastal commission. So it'll be a combination of not just what the community's input is. Of course, if they lean a certain way, we definitely want to respect that, but at the same time, we do need to discuss those preferences with MCOG and also with the Minnesota County Planning and Building and Coastal Commission. We certainly don't want to go down a road on a project we can't get a permit for that the majority of the community wants to support, obviously. So, you know, that's again the reason why we feel it's necessary to recirculate and have a virtual public meeting, which is required once you circulate. But in this case, it's not required, but because of the controversy within the community, Caltrans feels that it is important to have that virtual public meeting, get input, and make sure we do enough outreach to make sure that everyone's voice is heard whose voices want to be heard. The feelings like to add on to that?
You know, Frank, I hear you what you're saying, but that was the reason for the last public meeting. It was the reason for the one before that. It was the reason for that before that. In February 18, you led a public meeting where the preferences was for
well,
no
there's not
parking on
going to
the
be
highway.
this will not delay the construction year. Okay, so we have time to do this. A lot of this is tied to funding that we're hoping to get to fill in the gap from the ATP grant. But we also know that, you know, with that funding out to 2025, we have time to go through the process and get comments from the community. We want to be respectful of those that haven't seen this new iteration, and this iteration is based on comments that were received from a number of community members. So we're trying to hone in on what we feel the community really wants, but we definitely recognize that it's going to be important to balance the needs of all stakeholders. And that's not going to be an easy feat with all of the controversy on the on-street parking and some of the other features that we are proposing. So again, we will take those comments. We will talk to MCOG. We will talk to Minnesota County Planning and Building and the Coastal Commission. And then we will come back and we will put recommendations in the final environmental document project report for the preferred alternative. At that point, I mean, it's going to really be up to MCOG what direction they want to go. So if you feel free to weigh in there.
Sure. So what I've kind of discussed about the process with Caltrans District 1 management on how that would work, it would be a recommendation from the project team, essentially would be put forward to MCOG, and MCOG would endorse that or not. So that's how that process would work with MCOG. It is not entirely an MCOG decision, obviously, because it's a Caltrans project. So it has to be something that Caltrans is willing and able to do. As far as, I just want to comment on Tom, the past times when the community has shown support, and I agree, it was very disappointing when we had such strong support for one project concept, and then as the design team got further into it, they realized that there were these constraints that they hadn't factored in before. And then, as you know, it brought up the need for retaining walls. And so things changed. So we weren't able to do that in the way we had originally presented it to the community. And that's why, even though that was frustrating for everyone, we had to go back to the community and ask for more input. And I think that it is ultimately going to result in something that's the best for the community, even though I do understand it is frustrating. As far as gauging community support, as I've said, I think a couple times tonight already, nothing is ever going to have 100% community support. There will always be certain aspects of something that people don't agree with. Some people will like everything about the project. Some people will say, don't do anything at all, leave Gualala alone. So there's always going to be some differing opinions, but as long we think that we can, and I think that what we have now is something that a majority of the community can be comfortable with.
Well, thank you, Nafili. I appreciate that. And, you know, if I keep harping on, let's not drag this out. Well, A, it has been 27 years. B, we've been through some vicious debates in this community. C, Caltrans did a very thorough job last year, held its public hearing, held a survey, and found that people were 89%, I believe it was 89% in favor of moving ahead with this project, and showed strong support for Alternative 4. This is a minor alteration of Alternative 4. It really does come under that CEQA code. One of my interests here is seeing peace in our community. This is January 6th, and a year ago, we had an attack on our Capitol in Washington. Let me tell you, the divisions in the community here, as Nafili noted, there's some people who are still opposed to various aspects of this project at all. There are some who want a little difference here and a little different there, but the overwhelming majority at the predominance of the meetings over 27 years, and the town plan and the county ordinances and all that, and the Coastal Commission is towards a greener Gualala with little parking. So please consider that as you finalize this plan. Our council will continue to put our ear to the community and hear what they have to say about this. We'll ask them to comment to Caltrans as well and help you formulate your decision. And I hope we can come to a final agreement on this without recirculation, because these debates are really hurting our community. And we really need this road for safety. Thank you. I'm going to wrap up this meeting, unless Robert, if that's okay with you, and unless somebody else has a quick
let's
hand.
wrap up this part, unless Don or Kevin or Melissa have something else to say, then we'll move on to our agenda. Hearing from none of the other council members, we've heard from the audience. Anybody else? Last call.
I really want to take the opportunity to thank Frank, Nafili, Tariq, and Elias for coming tonight, as well as our, and Tariq says thank you all to you all. He's been listening as he's putting his tots to bed. Tariq, we'll look forward to working with you. And please, let's have a dialogue. I think Robert and I would very much like to speak with you in the next week or two and kind of follow up on this and see if we can iron out some last details here. Congratulations on the appointment to this. I think congratulations is the right word. You may regret it. I don't know, Frank, you can advise him on that. But it's a tough one, and it's everything to us here in Gualala. Our whole town depends on hospitality and welcoming visitors. The greenery is a real thing. Parking is not a real thing here. And people want to get this thing built and be safer. And we want to stop arguing with our neighbors about this, because we respect everybody here and we want to hear their points of view, but enough is enough. Thank you again for this meeting. I'm sorry to the council that's taken this long, but yes, Robert, I think it's time to move on with the agenda.
I agree. Okay, yeah, Tom, your report.
I have a visual comment for you tonight.
Okay.
If they put interim parking in front of the hotel breakers, that hedge will be a sidewalk. There'll be pavement from the hotel across the parking lot, the sidewalk, to the parking spaces, to the bike lane, to the traffic lane, the center turn lane, a traffic lane, another bike path, another sidewalk, and then the sidewalk of the hotel. The center part of our town would turn into a giant plaza. I think this is antithetical to our town plan. And Robert and I will take another look at the project here tonight, and we'll make some findings and probably bring it back to the council next month for another review and possible action.
Yeah.
I think we need to get some more comments from the public about this. I don't think this idea would go over well. And there are alternatives to doing this. This is not what this council has backed in the past. And I see no reason to start this now. Not to mention, I'd like to talk to the owner of the hotel who's invested his life savings in building and buying this place.
Right.
And who strongly opposed parking here last year. And now to make that accommodation for the sake of having surplus parking for the surf market, it was one thing when we were talking about extending the parking on the highway for them. It's another thing to start encroaching on another landowner to do that. So that's my final thought on all this for tonight, and I'll be giving it consideration going forward.
Well, Tom, now that you brought it up, I'll feed into my report, okay? And I'm glad you brought up that slide. Please leave it up. And we do need to talk to that property owner. And this also ties in, I mean, this is existing vegetation in a way. It could be incorporated into a landscaping strip, in my opinion.
Yeah, it could very well.
We have the same issue up at the north end, at the Sea Cliff, with the existing hedgerow.
Right.
That they're looking to remove. So we've got that in two parts of town where we already have existing vegetation that's been manicured for decade plus, I want to say. How come those features can't be incorporated into our streetscape and count as part of the landscaping?
They could very easily if this was a landscape area, which is what the town plan requires. If you have the width, you're supposed to have landscaping.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to deal away with landscaping on both sides of the street for the sake of putting 4 parking spaces here, because they talk about putting a red curb in here.
Mm-hmm.
So 4 parking spaces and destroying all this landscaping and taking out landscaping from the hotel. My first reaction to this is not positive. So I will keep an open mind and talk to more people, but that's where I am on this right now.
In my opinion, it all goes back to trying to appease one property owner who seems to constantly be against the forward progress of our streetscape. And it's the 5 spaces that so often get put in the forefront. And if we could just solve the deficiency of parking at that one property, we could get moving forward on this streetscape. But I think the higher up authorities are having to listen too much to a single property owner. So I better leave it at that.
And putting the whole town through another public debate about this.
Yeah.
It just seems cruel, frankly.
Just as a point of clarification.
Could this photograph be shown to Caltrans as well as a photograph up at the
Sea Cliff?
At the Sea Cliff to
Good idea.
show that this will disappear and that cars will appear instead.
Good idea, Tom. What do you think?
Very much.
Yes, and I was also thinking just now when I make the video of our meeting tonight, I'll of the Caltrans project, I'll include this discussion as an addendum to it.
Please do, because losing the greenery and losing this space to sidewalks and to bicycles is egregious. We don't need the parking, and it's for 4 parking places. Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really not a great idea,
No.
and it's going to cause trouble. It's going to cause recirculate, maybe an amendment to the town plan. And if it gets through, then you can say there's no delay, but there's always delays. Even Caltrans said on their slide that unless there's complete community approval, there could be delays. So there won't be community approval, unanimous approval of this. I can see that coming. And I'm responsible for everybody here, and a majority of the people in this town want to maintain the natural surroundings. So I'm with them.
Yeah, the more natural the surrounding, the better.
Any last words on this issue, Don or Kevin, under my chairman's report?
Just a point of clarification. So what Caltrans is proposing here is eliminating all the parking that is directly in front of the surf, and even to the north of surf to a certain.
Where that car is.
Yeah, but and then instead setting up 4 off-street parking places here. I think we're going to do all this and potentially ruin this aspect of the community for 4 lousy parking places.
That's what they're talking about.
Doesn't
And
make
let me
any
just show
sense.
you their slide again.
Yeah,
The sidewalk slips to the west. It eliminates that hedge. It goes to the top of the 2-foot retaining wall that's at the end of that parking lot. It eliminates all the greenery in front of the hotel.
Wait a minute, Tom. It doesn't eliminate the greenery in front of the hotel. There is no
Oh, yeah.
greenery.
There would be.
There
There
is,
would be
well, there
at least,
would,
there would have been a 2-foot strip here if there's
That's
no
true.
parking there. There
There
would have
would
been a
be.
2-foot strip here as well. There would have been greenery on both sides of the sidewalk because the sidewalk would be where the parking spaces are. What the town plan says is you get 3 lanes, you get the bike, you get a sidewalk, you get greenery for the rest of it.
right.
And at 80 feet, it would be 12 feet on each side. At
Mhm.
66 feet, do the math, take off 7 of that 12 feet, you'd still have 5 on each side.
Right.
So that's the alternative here. I don't really believe that if the surf ever remodels, people will want to walk this far. I do believe there should be time limits on any spaces that do come in here. And I do believe that an interim needs to be fixed. So we can talk more about this, but
Okay.
and
We'll
let's
do that
talk
in-
to people in the community, see what they say.
Yeah, and we'll do that in committee. Okay.